Welcome to season 2 of the Future Worlds podcast. We've changed up the location to our studio here in the accelerator space in Future Worlds. We're going to have some exciting guests and previous founders through Future Worlds, some of the mentors, the investors in our network around Future Worlds. We're also going to be hearing from me, Ben Clark, and Iles, part of the Future Worlds team, as we really try to get behind the scenes of what is it like to launch a tech startup from a university, and what does the journey look like as you try to do something that you've not done before. But today we're going to be diving into the whole question of International Women's Day. We're filming this just before it. By the time it's gone online, it will have already happened. And here in Future Worlds, it is an ongoing conversation and a challenge to us on how can we be more diverse? How can we be more open? How can we be more welcoming to anyone within the startup community? Knowing and very conscious that within engineering generally, within tech startups specifically, there's a real challenge of gender diversity, and we experience exactly that. So I'm really keen today to really hear from you, Alice, hear your perspective on that matter, having come into the Future Worlds team and made such a difference personally, and yet also we've struggled with challenges and seeing more diversity in the pipeline of startup founders that we have. And Alice, we often have conversations about this here in the accelerator. And I know that you have a whole range of insights around it, but how do you react when a couple of weeks before International Women's Day, all of the kind of conversation starts revolving around that?
So I think it's great that there's a day, you can recognize women, and lots of companies will take this opportunity to publicize some of their really successful women and some of their stories. And I think this can provide a platform for role models and showing younger women, like, look what you can achieve. And that's great. And there's definitely a place for that. But I think a lot of it has become around this tokenism of, we need to do something for International Women's Day. So let's just pop a post on LinkedIn and we'll reel out our one woman at the company that we use every time, put a picture of her up, great, done. And it's like, it's great to have a platform and to raise awareness, but it's not really actually contributing. Are they posting their gender pay gap for their companies on there? I highly doubt it. So, what can people actually be doing to recognize their amazing women, but also to be trying to change the culture to ensure there's actually better diversity moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, there was that bot that became famous, wasn't there, that would automatically then post the gender pay gap for any company that tagged IWD. And so then suddenly a load of corporates are shutting down on using that tag because of the fear that the reality doesn't really match up to the glossed image. Do you think that tokenism gets in the way of things? Is there any value in some of that kind of the gesture?
So I think, as you say, like, if people get then scared, it's sort of like, oh, if you don't know what to do, just do nothing. And then so people don't engage at all. I think that has to be worse, that you're not giving any recognition to it. But, it does highlight that there's actually bigger problems that need solving. And I think it's just about trying to actually, like, is this the conversation? It's having those conversations. Okay, you're scared to post your gender pay gap because it's bad. So, like, what are you going to do about it? Instead of just not posting it, think about your long-term plan for actually reducing your gender pay gap. And I think that's maybe what more about International Women's Day should be. It's like not just nice, happy stories, but it's also the harsh reality of the progress that, we're making progress, but there's still a lot to be done.
And it's really difficult, isn't it? And we feel the same thing. So even this year with recruitment for cohorts, we've been doing a lot that we think as Future Worlds, we've been trying to be as engaging and as open and as diverse as we can be. We then recruit for a cohort of startups, and we were disappointed that there were not more women that applied to go on the cohort, that we've got very few women that are engaged in the cohort now. How do you think we should process that externally? How should we handle that disappointment?
Yeah, so I think obviously, last year was my first cohort and it was really great diversity. And then this year was very disappointing. And I think it's okay to admit sometimes, that you are disappointed with that. I think especially with diversity, lots of people are very quick to try and cover things up and to be like, yeah, we're very diverse, everything's fine, there's not a problem. Because as you say, they don't want to kind of get ridiculed for it. But I think it's also about being open to how we could try and fix it. And if you don't, be open and communicate and ask people for help, how do you make a change? Obviously, I think there's going to be years where it like peaks and troughs and there's going to be natural kind of changes in it. But I suppose you've been at Future Worlds a lot longer than I have. So how have you seen that change over time, maybe?
Yeah, I guess until this year had been celebrating that it looked like the trend was going the right direction, was delighted last year with that balance that we had this great demo day, 6 brilliant startups and this 50-50 balance, not only between men and women, but also between researchers and students. And that diversity is a great thing. So then it hit really hard when we looked at the pipeline this year. We just didn't know what had gone wrong. What have we done wrong? And that was the immediate thought from my side are we doing something? Am I personally doing something wrong that is then causing that? There's a variety of things, I suppose, that we've tried and that we've done. So we know that one of the challenges is if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so we do want to showcase great women startup founders. We want to build a network that's as diverse as possible and shining a light on brilliant women who are leading in a variety of different fields, but particularly within tech. And we've done different events around that, which have been really well received. And yet still the numbers then this year don't seem to marry up to that. So yeah, I guess it leaves me, doubting, questioning, just uncertain in terms of what is the right thing to do. I'm also very conscious that I'm an old white guy, so I'm part of the problem in that I'm massively overrepresented in startups, in engineering, in so many contexts, in leadership. And so on one level, the best thing I can do is just leave because then there's another vacant space. And yet what I want to do is use the position I have and the experience and background I have to contribute positively. But even then you sort of are tripping over yourself thinking, well, is it positive or is it negative? Am I adding to this or am I detracting from it? So what do you feel coming into Future Worlds that you've observed as some of the obvious things that could be better?
I think one of the big things we often say is that, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And that idea of having really strong role models. And I think that is so important, especially for like young girls that are in school, looking forward for their careers. And I think part of that is that we're kind of stuck within the startup ecosystem, specifically within tech. We have a lot of our mentors had incredible careers. They were CEOs of very successful tech startups. But if you look back to, say, the 80s, when some of these people were doing those roles, like there were even less women in those kind of roles then than there are now. So if we want those mentors that are kind of retired from those positions, that have the time to help us out, very, very few of those actually exist. So if you're watching, please get in touch because we would just love to be engaging, I think, more of those types of people that have lived through that and they have that real life experience. I think, again, something that I always talk about is going back to schools, it's outreach, and it's kind of public engagement around if young girls aren't studying STEM subjects at school, they're not going to do a STEM subject at university, and then they're probably not going to found a tech startup. It's not a rule, but I think you can see those trends. And so even now we're dealing with 20-year-olds at university. They've already had so much influence that was out of our control. So I think that it's definitely a bigger picture, bigger problem. But I think engaging more mentors and trying to change the way that people see themselves, if we can even just encourage a few young women to believe in themselves, to know that they have the skills, they're not an imposter, they deserve to be here, then we can help, motivate them and inspire them to be startup founders.
And you had that experience yourself, didn't you? I remember you saying that you got 100% in your physics GCSE, and yet you didn't have teachers and mentors around you who are saying, you're obviously really good at this, and this is a really great enabling A-level to go on to a whole range of different things. And so you weren't steered towards an A-level in physics when you obviously had the capability to do it.
Yeah, I hope none of my teachers are watching, but I think the teachers play an enormous role and they have such influence. And maybe they can't nurture every individual child in that way. I appreciate they're very busy, but it's having those people to be like, even if that's maybe not your parents for everyone, if you have teachers that can be like, you can do this, believe in yourself, and they actively encourage you. Because from my personal experience, when you're 15, like you don't really know what you want to do. Maybe you don't even care what subjects you do because you don't really understand the significance of it at that age. So you need people that do know how important it is to try and help guide you on your path. So yeah, I'm not sure how we can influence that, but it's kind of the bigger picture around, obviously the government's doing a lot at the moment around the startup space, around the UK being a tech powerhouse. It's like, so you need to put that back into schools to be saying, right, this is what we need to be doing, starting from the root cause through to them being successful CEOs.
Yeah. And one of the challenges in that, you talked about these role models, and you said that there were fewer women in leadership positions in the 80s, the 90s coming through. And so there is a smaller pool of people who have got that background, that experience, the lived experience. And what we don't want to be doing is just doing the tokenistic, here's a picture of a woman who did some great stuff, or wheeling the same people out time and time again and abusing their goodwill and their input because, well, we don't have more people that we can be pulling on. How do you square that circle between the authenticity and the pressing need that we need to show people that have been there before, the trailblazers that people can follow?
I think I know a lot of those people that have been the token women. I think I've been a token woman myself on a few occasions. And although you can see it as a negative that, you're being wheeled out and it's a lot of your own time, I think lots of, especially women that are in that situation, will understand why it's important. And actually, maybe, it's some skin off my nose to do this. It's a bit of effort. But actually, I think if I can inspire like one young woman to think, oh, yeah, I could do a STEM subject. I could do that. I could go to university, whatever it is, then I think it's worth it. So you don't want to abuse people's goodwill, but I think people are generally like they want to help because they want to see change.
I remember we did a roundtable event last year talking about this subject, and a number of people coming around and sharing their insights. And Leanne Fricker talked about this sort of going from -1 to 1 rather than just 0 to 1. And so many of the women startup founders that she was working with didn't have a kind of a vision of quite how capable they were, quite what opportunity they had, and that she was doing this intervention just to bring them up to 0. How is it that you think we can be doing more as Future Worlds to help connect with people who perhaps don't recognize that they have the potential, the capability to go on this journey?
I think doing things like this podcast, I hope that helps people realize that that's something that we're trying to achieve. So we're open to that. We see diversity as being very important. But I think it's also, you're trying to find people. You say, oh, people that want to be startup founders come and speak to us. It's like, so they already know they want to be a startup founder. So it's trying to find those people that have no idea, that think that would never be for them, that actually have these amazing skills. And so I think it's trying to find other ways of engaging around, some of the like societies with students. It's trying to engage people in a different way. So thinking around how can we speak to people that are doing specific subjects at universities, things like this, where perhaps you don't scare them off too early with the startup jargon, but just try and help them realize their potential because they have some amazing, techies out there just waiting to be found.
It strikes me, and I know from things you've shared with me before, one of the challenges that you see is that the support that is supposed to be there to help address this issue is often focused on fixing the women, because obviously the women are the problem, not the men. And so therefore we put training on that fixes you. How have you experienced that, and what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, so without calling anyone out, because I think, again, all of these things are really well intended. So I think women-only training is supposed to be a space where women can go, they can feel comfortable to talk about things that they might not, in front of maybe their male colleagues, and it's this sort of safe space, and that's great. But I think sometimes there's this big focus around you're calling out women for being different. So like a women in leadership training, for instance, why can't women just have leadership training? Because they can't compete with the men for the leadership, so they have to have special training. And it's a really delicate balance between those two things of having a safe space and then having it to not be slightly patronizing, in my experience. And I think, again, with the sort of fixing people, I think a comment that was made previously to me is that a lot of women suffer from imposter syndrome, like a lot of people do. And so the solution is to provide training to those individuals so that they can overcome their imposter syndrome. And actually, I don't think that is a solution. What I think is a solution is changing culture so that people don't feel like imposters when they really deserve to be there.
And what are some of the ways that you've experienced that imposter syndrome from a culture that has then made you feel like you don't belong?
Yeah, so I think, again, I don't want to call anybody out on this to attack anyone, but if you're in a department where you are maybe the minority, so that may be women, and to feel like, you know, you only got there because you're a woman, you're ticking an EDI box. I've had someone previously say to me, like, oh yeah, apply for that job, you'll get it because you're a woman, so they have to employ some women, you know. And I appreciate there are now like quotas around EDI, which I think is a good thing. But then what you don't want it to do is flip to the other side, where now it's that, yeah, women are being told that they only got that job because they're a woman and not because they deserve it. And there's nothing worse than that, you know, and then having all that respect taken away. So it's definitely a delicate balance.
Don't you think that's one of the challenges in any of this kind of conversation is you don't want to throw anyone under the bus. You don't want to offend people. So there are real examples that you have experienced that processing those could be helpful to the community, but it would be very difficult because then it's going to make someone else look bad. And that, it strikes me, that holds back a lot of the debate.
Yeah, so I think I do give my feedback, as you well know. So I have called people out in the past for various things, but there is always that argument that if something is potentially going to damage your personal career, you know, say it's your manager and you want a promotion, but actually they said something sexist to you, you know, are you going to call them out? Because that's going to negatively impact you. So you're torn between the sort of like greater good for womankind and equality and all of these things, but actually your own personal life. And that can be really, really difficult choice to have to make.
Yeah, the whistleblower challenge, that whistleblowers typically end up really badly personally. They may have brought about change, but the cost to them sometimes can be immense. So one of the really challenging things in this space is the whole question of unconscious bias, because of course all of us have biases. And then the stuff that I'm not aware of in myself, I can't correct. And I can be blissfully causing damage left, right and centre and completely unaware of it. What are some of the insights you've got around unconscious bias?
I think the first thing is to recognise, like, we all have unconscious biases. And the fact that they're unconscious probably means that you're not aware of what they are. And there are actually tests that you can do online to kind of find out what your unconscious biases are. And I think that is the first stage, is that kind of awareness, that you know that there'll be times when you might get it wrong. And I think it's nice here at Future Worlds, like we have a very sort of open policy that it's like always call people out. You know, you can be polite, you don't have to be rude, but to just say, actually, can I challenge what you just said because the language you used wasn't quite right, or, you know, reasons why that wasn't the best thing to say. And I think that's about learning and trying to help improve the culture without like attacking people, because everyone does inevitably make mistakes. I know how I have, you know, and in the past when I didn't spend as much time kind of like thinking about it, or like your knowledge is not as good, like it's all a journey, everyone's learning. So I think it's that. And there's other things around, like for you is a great example. So you're obviously a very senior man in the department, but you can be a great ally in that. So although having your man status might feel like, oh, well, how can I be included on the, you know, EDI argument, but actually you're key to it, because we need allies, we need people that are representing, that are kind of helping to people in positions of power, are the ones that can change the culture, you know, and to help start these kind of conversations. So that's really key. And I think there's little things people can do around, you know, like calling people out in, say, meetings. You know, if you can see that there's people within the meeting who haven't said anything because they keep getting talked over, things like that, you know, you're probably in a position to actually say to somebody, oh, do you mind, you know, Alice hasn't said anything. And I think, you know, those are the kind of power that you have to use for good. But it's an awareness. And so it's just starting to help tell people about these things so they think, oh, I'd never thought about that before. And that's okay. And
yeah, and obviously as an ally, I try to do things well, but I also get things wrong all the time. In fact, far too frequently. And you've called me out on things that I've been getting wrong in the past, and perhaps it's become more of a habit recently. But initially, perhaps that would have been fairly uncomfortable. You relatively new, relatively junior compared to my position. How did you find that process of confronting me on stuff that I was doing wrong?
So I think I've been in situations, worked in places where I've been a woman and I felt slightly uncomfortable about that in the context. And so I think you get very used to it. So on one hand, I sort of look back at my younger self and think, oh, I wish she had had more confidence to call things out. You know, I think you tend to just get more confident as you get older. But it's also, I feel like I have that confidence and maybe some knowledge that other people don't. And so it's almost a responsibility I feel to try and help, because there are lots of women that are very quiet, very shy, like wouldn't feel comfortable to do that. So I feel like, if you can, then you sort of have to do it on their behalf. So that you can try, if I can help change one person's perspective and then you're an ally, you can then pass that message on to others. So it's kind of like a little string of education.
And what is it that gives you that confidence to be able to speak out?
I think it's experience. I think it is trying to equip yourself with knowledge because, it's very difficult. Sometimes I find myself in a feminist rant with someone. And it's very clear when people actually, I don't mind someone having a differing opinion to me, because if people have done their research and they've got something to back it up, but I think it's people not really knowing, it's, do I use that word? Can I say that? What's kind of appropriate? And I think people get nervous that they're going to say the wrong thing and upset someone. But I always think if you say everything that's meant to be, always with the mind of being constructive, trying to educate someone, trying to help, and it's not attacking, then, if you use the wrong word, someone can say, actually, just for future reference, don't use that word. And that's okay. It's very delicate. And I think it takes time.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely delicate. I certainly feel as a man in this context, I feel quite inhibited, quite nervous about engaging in the conversation because I think, well, one, what do I know? I haven't got that lived experience in the same way, but also that fear of getting it wrong, saying the wrong thing, and broadly the sense of the angry mob will then absolutely wheel in and can throw me under the bus very easily because I've said the wrong thing, maybe with the right intent, but it can be taken as, I'm biggest villain ever. How should people cut through that noise?
It is really hard because there will always be people that will get mad and will shout at you when you get it wrong. And I think that does come from a place of they kind of have reasons for that, probably had some bad experiences. But I think for the most part, again, people do want to help, people want to educate. So I think it's okay to ask. I mean, as a first line of defense, Google it. If you don't want to ask anyone in case it's wrong, you can Google it. There is a lot of information out there now about these types of things. There's loads of training courses that you can access for free to try and educate yourself. And then I think there are lots of, again, it's around the allies. There's lots of communities where, I know especially here, there's a huge community of people that if this was an issue you're unsure of, you could go there and you could ask and everyone would be very comfortable and open to you doing so. So it's just finding those little pockets of knowledge and trying to help kind of spread the good word, I think, about them.
So what would be, some of perhaps the top 3 ways that people in our network, people watching this podcast could help you specifically, could help Future Worlds more generally with addressing the challenges that we face?
I think the biggest thing is get in touch. So if you're, a prospective startup founder, or you think you never would be, and you have a good reason for that, tell me why. What can I do to engage you? Would you, are there programs that I could put on that would help support you? If you're a mentor or you have this business experience, you were a founder, how can I improve that? If you're a big corporate or another accelerator program that has an amazing diversity track record, what kind of schemes can we put in place? What is it that we can be doing? I really want to get input from people that have done it, that, have better ideas than we do, because, we have tried, and I think it's not through lack of trying, but maybe we're just not doing quite right. Maybe this year is just a very unfortunate blip. I hope that is it and it's not a bigger issue, but even so, I still want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can for the future to be engaging more and more women into the, tech ecosystem.
Yeah, you talk about hearing from people who don't want to launch a startup. Now, from our side, it'd be really helpful. It might be really uncomfortable, but really helpful to hear the perspectives of people who don't want to engage with us and hearing why not. What is it about what we do that puts people off? Because that's the feedback we very rarely hear. We hear the people that have engaged, that are loving that experience. But to hear the voices of people who say, actually, for these reasons, I wouldn't want to go anywhere near you, that'd be really helpful.
I think one of the things that we've kind of tried to do is have me, reaching out, doing more engagement externally. And so then that makes me worry that I've actually scared all the women off. So it would be really good to know what it is that we could be doing. Or maybe people just, they don't even care or notice. I don't know. But if there's takeaways that we could actually, actionable things, I'd be really keen to do those.
So it'd be really helpful for people who are watching to hear what are some of the things that you would recommend people do as next steps as a result to make a difference in this space.
I think if you are in a position where you can help others, something that I found really useful over the years is people that are willing to like make introductions for you, to kind of take you to things like events that might be really useful, and help you kind of grow your network and your education is one thing that I think can be really valuable, if you're in that kind of position, or perhaps you're, if you're an investor looking to invest in people. And as well as, I see the investment is not just in money, but it's in your time and your care and your experience to people that haven't had that opportunity before. So I don't know if you wanted to talk about your favorite book, that you also introduced me to.
I introduced you to, it was introduced to me by Grace Burton on the Future Worlds team. And I would recommend anyone reads it, but particularly I would recommend that any men who are watching this read this book. So Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. You can get it on Amazon. It's all about exposing the gender data gap. And as a man, I found it fascinating and troubling, disturbing, but so helpful to get a perspective of how the world is built around this default male. And as a man, I then just don't notice it as well. So you just get into this way of seeing the world that just thinks that humanity is basically men, and anything that's not a man is sort of other and sort of different. It was really, really helpful and just littered with incredible facts and evidence showing the impact that it has. That has absolutely helped me see the world differently and have much more of an understanding of some of the challenges that it's so easy to just brush under the carpet. And as a man, think, it's basically all right. It's basically fair. It's basically balanced. So that one book, thoroughly recommend it. Invisible Women, Caroline Criado Perez, well worth reading. Anything else that you found helpful?
I think reaching out to people, knowing that there's people you can talk to. So I would really love anyone that's thinking that they might have some kind of cool techie thing, but they're not sure if it's a startup. They don't know if they can be a startup founder. Just reach out, drop me an email, come speak to us. You can speak to anyone in our network. It's those kind of really small conversations, which are not a huge gesture, that will long-term lead to really big things.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I find so fulfilling in Future Worlds is the times we see people who engage with us somehow, but at the beginning they are convinced that it's not possible, that they could never go on this journey, they could never launch this kind of startup. But by a process of small steps along the way, meeting people, having input, having support, actually then further down the line, they look back and they cannot believe how far they've come. And you talked about imposter syndrome. I think everyone suffers from imposter syndrome in different ways. And I think every startup founder we've supported along the way has this imposter syndrome where they believe that it couldn't be them. And it's only through trying and only through experiencing what it's like and experiencing the incredible goodwill and support that exists around the community that then they discover actually they can do this. It is possible. And seeing those doors open is remarkably fulfilling.
So if you think we can help you or you can help us, you have any contributions to our conversation or any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. So please get in touch.